My dad told me not to come home for Christmas, and the way he said it made it sound like a scheduling issue, not a rejection. I was standing in my kitchen in Boston when the call came through, phone buzzing against the counter next to a mug of coffee that had already gone cold. Outside my window, the street was quiet in that late December way. Lights up, snow pushed into gray piles along the curb, people already home with their families. I remember thinking it was odd he was calling instead of texting. That should have been my first clue. Paige's voice was already on the line when I answered. She had me on speaker. I could tell by the echo, the way my own hello came back at me half a second later. "So," she said, drawing the word out, "we need to talk about Christmas." Her tone was light, almost cheerful, the way she gets when she thinks she's being reasonable. I leaned back against the counter and crossed my ankles, listening. She didn't wait for me to respond. She never does. She said that since I was doing so well now, and since I made more money than anyone else in the family, it only made sense that I handle the big gift this year. I asked what she meant by big gift. There was a pause, and then she said it. She wanted a new SUV, not used, not last year's model. New. She said it would be perfect, because it could be her Christmas gift and her future wedding gift all in one. Very efficient. Her word, not mine. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of the sheer audacity of it. Of all the things I expected to hear that morning, that was not on the list. I said, "Paige, I'm not doing that." I kept my voice even. I remember noticing that my hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. She immediately jumped in, saying I could afford it, that I was always talking about budgeting and planning and investing. So what was the point of all that if I couldn't help my own sister? She said everyone knew I had money. She said I was being dramatic about nothing. I took a breath. I told her I was saving for my MBA tuition. I said it plainly, like a fact, not an argument. I said I was paying for it myself, part-time, on purpose, and that it mattered to me. That was when her tone changed. "Oh my God," she said. "There it is. You always do this. You always bring up your degrees like that makes you better than everyone else. You are so cheap, Lena. You really are." I didn't say anything right away. I could hear her breathing on the line, sharp and fast, like she was already worked up. In the background, I heard my mom moving around, the clink of dishes. Paige kept going. She said I never supported her. She said I cared more about spreadsheets than people. She said everyone else in the family made sacrifices, but I always had an excuse. I opened my mouth to respond, but that was when my dad cut in. "Enough," he said. His voice was flat, tired. I recognized that tone. It was the one he used when he wanted something to stop without actually dealing with it. He said that Christmas was supposed to be about family, and that I couldn't be supportive, then maybe I shouldn't come home at all. He said it slowly, like he was choosing his words carefully, like this was a reasonable conclusion he had arrived at after weighing all the options. If you can't be supportive, don't come home. There it was. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched, thick and awkward. I could hear my own breathing, steady, a little too loud in my ears. I waited for my mom to say something. She didn't. I realized then that this wasn't a discussion. It wasn't even a fight. It was a decision that had already been made, and I was just being informed. I felt something settle in my chest, cold and clear. Not anger, not sadness, recognition. This was what it looked like when you were optional. I said okay. Just that. One word. Paige scoffed. My dad sighed, like I was being difficult by not pushing back. No one asked if I was all right. No one asked what I would do instead. The call ended shortly after that. There were no goodbyes. The screen went dark, and my reflection stared back at me, a little pale, eyes too bright. I stood there like an idiot, phone still pressed to my ear. If you've ever been cut out of something quietly, you know the feeling. There's no explosion, no dramatic exit, just the dull realization that everyone else moved on without you. I set the phone down on the counter, screen facing up, and watched it like it might light up again. It didn't. I didn't call back. That part was new. Normally, I would have smoothed things over. I would have explained myself again, found a compromise, transferred some money just to keep the peace. That had been my role for as long as I could remember. The reliable one, the reasonable one, the one who didn't rock the boat. But something about the way my dad said it, "Don't come home," flipped a switch on me. It wasn't about the car. It never was. It was about the fact that my presence was conditional, and the conditions had finally been stated out loud. If you're listening to this and thinking it sounds familiar, stay with me. I promise this isn't just another story about family drama. It's about what happens when you stop paying for your place at the table, and what it costs everyone else when you finally do. I'm not naive, and I know exactly how to set boundaries to protect myself. I unplugged the little ceramic Christmas tree I kept on the counter and slid it into a drawer. It felt silly to leave it out. I rinsed my mug and set it in the drying rack. Normal, boring tasks. My body was moving on autopilot while my brain replayed the call over and over. I thought about the SUV. I pictured Paige behind the wheel, smug, already talking about upgrades. I thought about how easily my dad had chosen her side, how my mom had stayed quiet, like she always did when things got uncomfortable. I could trace the pattern back years. At 10, when Paige forgot her homework and I helped her finish it, then got scolded for making her feel stupid. At 16, when I worked weekends and paid for my own prom dress while she got a credit card with no limit. At 23, when I moved cities for a job and was told I was abandoning the family, while Paige moved back home and was praised for being close. I used to think if I explained myself better, things would change. Looking back, that was naive. I sat down at the small table by the window and opened my laptop. My calendar popped up automatically. Blocks of color marking meetings, deadlines, and a final exam for my accounting course. My life, laid out in neat rectangles. Christmas Day was empty. No travel, no obligations, just white space. I closed the laptop. I wasn't angry yet. That came later. What I felt in that moment was something closer to resolve. A quiet, steady decision forming under the surface. If I wasn't wanted, I wouldn't beg. I picked up my phone one more time. No new messages. I scrolled through the thread with my family, my own text dotted between theirs. Always longer, always trying to explain. I noticed how often I said, sorry. I hadn't realized before. I typed a message, then I deleted it. I set the phone face down this time. Outside, a car drove by slowly, tires crunching over old snow. Somewhere down the block, someone laughed. Life was continuing, indifferent to my small personal crisis. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the radiator. I thought about what it would mean not to go home. Not just this year, ever. The idea scared me. It also felt strangely freeing. I didn't sleep much. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and wrote out my budget, numbers lining up neatly on the screen. Tuition, rent, savings. I recalculated a few things, made adjustments. If I was going to do this alone, I wanted to be prepared. By the time the sun came up, pale and weak through the window, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment I stopped letting other people write it for me. I sat there for a long minute after the sun came up, just listening to the quiet of my apartment, the faint creak of the radiators, the soft hum of the fridge. Nothing dramatic. No tears. No anger boiling over, just the stillness I had never felt before, like my mind finally caught up to something my body already knew. By the time evening rolled around, Christmas Eve inched in the way winter nights do in Boston, slow and heavy. The sky outside my window turned a washed-out blue, then gray, then black. Streetlights flickered along Tremont Street, throwing long shadows across the snowbanks. I stood in the middle of my studio, looking at the little ceramic tree I had shoved into a drawer earlier that morning. It wasn't even a real tree, just a tiny thing with painted bulbs and a chipped corner from when I dropped it during a move. I pulled it out and set it on the counter. For a second, I almost plugged it back in. Habit, I guess. My hand hovered over the cord. Then I let it fall. I wrapped the tree in a dish towel, placed it in a storage bin under my bed, slid the bin closed, and that was that. Next came the plane ticket. I found the printed confirmation on my desk, edges curled, ink fading. I ran my thumb along the top of it. Boston to Raleigh, departing the morning after Christmas Eve. It felt like it belonged to someone else now, a version of me who still had a place to return to. I folded the paper in half, then in quarters, then tore it once, then again. 8 pieces, 16. I dropped the pieces in the trash and closed the lid. I didn't block anyone. I could have. I thought about it once or twice, but blocking felt dramatic, and I wasn't interested in theatrics. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was done reaching. So I opened the group thread with my family, pressed the little bell icon, and put them on mute. The screen went quiet. No new messages, no missed calls, not even a question from my mom. That part stung more than I wanted to admit. I made myself dinner, scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy. I ate standing at the counter, staring out the window at the quiet street below. Somewhere in the building, someone was laughing. A warm, muffled sound. I let myself listen to it for a moment. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. When I climbed into bed that night, the apartment felt bigger than usual. Too much air. Too much quiet. I lay on my back and watched the shadows flicker across the ceiling. My phone sat on the nightstand, screen facing down. I didn't touch it. I didn't pick it up once. Christmas Eve used to mean staying up late with Paige, wrapping presents we'd pretend were from Santa for the younger cousins. It used to mean Mom making hot chocolate with extra whipped cream and my dad falling asleep on the couch halfway through some old movie he insisted on watching every year. Now it meant this. Just me in my small Boston apartment, the radiator clicking, the city humming softly outside. I thought I would cry. I didn't. I thought I would feel angry. I didn't. It was empty. Clean, quiet emptiness. I woke up Christmas morning before the sun came in. The sky had a pale tint to it, like it couldn't quite decide if it wanted to be morning or night. I lay there for a few minutes, listening to the stillness. Nothing had changed. Nothing was going to happen. I brushed my teeth, tied my hair back, pulled on jeans and a sweater. I made coffee and drank it slowly, leaning against the counter the same way I had the day before, when my entire holiday fractured with one sentence. If you can't be supportive, don't come home. I rinsed my mug and set it aside. The apartment felt too quiet, too tight around the edges, like the silence had weight to it. I could either sit here all day staring at the empty space where a Christmas should have been, or I could get up and go somewhere. Anywhere where the air didn't taste so stale. So I grabbed my coat. Not the heavy one, just the gray wool one I saved for nicer days. I wrapped a scarf around my neck, slipped my gloves into my pocket, and stood there for a moment with my hand on the doorknob. Leaving felt like a decision. A real one. I didn't want to spend Christmas crying over people who had already decided I wasn't worth calling. That felt like its own kind of punishment, and I refused to be the one inflicting it. Outside, the hallway was dim, the motion sensor lights flicking on as I walked toward the stairs. My boots echoed softly on the concrete steps. When I pushed the front door open, a rush of cold air hit me in the face, sharp enough to make my eyes water. The city was quiet. Snow dusted the tops of cars and collected in soft drifts along the sidewalk. The sky was pale blue, thin sunlight stretching across the frozen pavement. A man walked his dog across the street, steam rising with each breath the dog exhaled. A T-bus rumbled past in the distance. I pulled my coat tighter around me and stepped onto the sidewalk. The cold seeped through my gloves, biting the tips of my fingers. I welcomed it. It made me feel awake, present. Alive in a way I hadn't felt in days. I didn't know exactly where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay where I was. My breath came out in soft white clouds as I walked. Cars passed, slow and steady, their tires crunching over packed snow. A couple holding hands brushed by me, smiling at each other like they were sharing a private joke. For a split second, I wondered what Paige was doing, if she had opened presents yet, if my mom had made cinnamon rolls, if my dad had put on that same red sweater he wore every year. They would do all of it without me, and they would be fine. And I would be fine too. For the first time, that didn't feel like a threat, or a punishment, or even a loss. It felt like a door clicking shut on something that had been cracked and splintering for years. I started walking with no real destination, the way you do when you need your body to move before your mind can catch up. Snow collected on my hair and melted on my collar. Cars passed with their headlights dimmed by flurries. Storefronts I had walked by 100 times were lit up in soft yellows and golds, wreaths hanging crookedly, paper snowflakes curling at the edges. I had seen all of this before. But this time, it felt different. Like I was seeing my own life from the outside for the very first time. The bakery on the corner still had its peppermint display. The bookstore still had that handwritten sign about being closed tomorrow. The hardware store still had a plastic Santa in the window whose arm never quite moved right. Nothing around me had changed, but I had. With every step, the weight in my chest rearranged itself. Not lighter, not heavier, just mine. Something I could hold without apologizing for it. Something I didn't have to explain or defend or hide. I reached Beacon Hill almost without realizing how far I'd walked, my fingers numb from the cold, my breath coming out in small white clouds. The quiet hit me first. Families ducked into restaurants with warm windows and louder laughter. Couples pulled scarves tighter around their necks. Someone brushed snow off a stroller with slow, careful hands. I paused on the sidewalk, letting the cold settle into me, not as punishment, but as clarity. The kind you feel right before you make a choice you have avoided for years. And that was when I saw it. A small place tucked between a florist and a used bookstore. Bistro Beacon Hill. I had passed it 100 times but never gone in. Tonight, its windows glowed with a warmth that looked almost alive. I stood there, watching the light flicker against glass, wondering if walking inside made me pathetic or brave. Then I pushed the door open. A bell chimed overhead and heat washed over me, carrying the scent of butter, rosemary, and something sweet I couldn't name. The room buzzed with low conversation, clinking glasses, forks tapping plates. People leaned close to each other, laughing, passing rolls, refilling wine. Families everywhere. Groups of 8, 10, 12. A table of 3 generations squeezed together. A toddler banging a spoon against a high-chair tray. A couple sharing a dessert, heads tilted toward each other. A hostess with a bright red scarf walked up to me with a smile that softened just enough when she realized I was alone. Just one. She led me to a small 2-person table tucked near the back, half hidden behind a pillar. A table meant for people who didn't need to be seen. I thanked her and sat down. The chair was warm. Someone must have just left. I opened the menu, even though I barely read it. My eyes kept drifting to the families around me. Not in envy, not exactly. More in disbelief that the world around me kept spinning while mine had gone so still. A server poured water into my glass. He asked if I wanted a drink. I said I'd start with water. My voice sounded steady. Too steady. The kind of steady you get when you are trying very hard not to fall apart in public. I ordered roasted chicken because it felt simple and safe. When the server walked away, I exhaled slowly, trying to get comfortable in my own skin. I could feel the warmth of the room on my face, hear the low hum of laughter, smell pine from a garland wrapped around a beam near my table. Then, out of nowhere, my eyes stung. It wasn't dramatic, just a slow burn. The kind you can blink away if you catch it early enough. I pressed my thumb into the corner of my eye. Once, twice, I dropped my gaze to the water glass, letting the condensation bead under my fingertips. You would think sadness like this arrives with a warning, a heavy wind, a crack in the sky. Mine arrived between fork clangs and a child's giggle from a nearby table. I kept my face down, breathing carefully, trying to keep the emotion contained. I didn't want anyone to see. I didn't want to become someone's uncomfortable holiday anecdote about the lonely woman crying into her water on Christmas. But footsteps approached, slow, deliberate, not the quick steps of a server rushing by. Honey. The voice was soft, but clear. I looked up. A woman stood beside my table, silver hair pulled back, pearl earrings, a deep green wool coat still draped over her shoulders. Her eyes were steady, warm, and assessing in a way that made me straighten up even before I spoke. "I'm fine," I whispered, already embarrassed. "Just tired." She tilted her head slightly as if that answer floated past her without landing anywhere meaningful. No one should eat alone on Christmas. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a pity. It was a statement delivered like a truth she had carried for years. I opened my mouth to decline whatever offer she was clearly working toward, but she put up a hand gently before I could form the word. "My family is right over there." She gestured to a large round table near the window, covered in plates and wine glasses and a centerpiece of pine cones and candles. "We have room." "You would be doing me a favor, honestly. My sons are arguing again about football, and I could use a new face to break the tension." I blinked at her. She looked like the kind of woman who didn't say things she didn't mean. Not pushy, just certain. I'm okay here, I tried again. Really? She smiled then, a small, patient curve of her lips, like she knew I didn't believe my own words. I'm Margaret, she said. Lowell. My husband is Jack. That is probably more information than you need, but I find introductions make invitations less intimidating. I actually felt a laugh push up from somewhere deep, somewhere that hadn't felt warm in a while. I'm Lena, I said. I appreciate the offer, but I don't want to intrude. You are not intruding. If I didn't want you there, I wouldn't have asked. Her tone was simple, unembellished. Come sit with us. Eat with us. Just for today. I hesitated. My hand curled around the edge of the table. The roasted chicken I had ordered hadn't arrived yet, but the idea of eating it alone suddenly felt heavier than the moment deserved. I glanced toward her table again. A man in his 60s waved when he noticed Margaret looking over. Two younger men, maybe mid-30s, were leaning in over some disagreement, but both looked up and offered polite nods. A teenage girl smiled shyly, and a little boy jabbed a fork in the air at me like a greeting. It wasn't the perfect picture of a magazine family. It was loud, messy, and alive. A table where someone like me could sit without feeling like a mistake. I stood up. Margaret's smile grew wider, not triumphant, just pleased. Come on, she said, before Jack eats all the rolls. He pretends he doesn't, but he absolutely does. I followed her through the maze of tables. The room seemed brighter as we walked. Or maybe my chest felt lighter, and everything around me adjusted to match it. Jack Lowell stood as we approached, one hand on the back of his chair. His hair was mostly gray, his posture straight but relaxed. He nodded at me with easy kindness. Well, look at that, he said. Marge found a stray. She finds all the good people. Sit, sit. The best seat is between the troublemakers. He pointed at the two men who immediately looked offended in the way only siblings can. I sat between them anyway. Plate shifted. Someone passed me a basket of rolls. One of the boys introduced himself as Daniel, the other as Finch. The teenager was Lily. The little boy was Clark. They were not the kind of family that clung to quiet, the kind that filled the air the way steam fills a room, warm and alive. Margaret slipped into her chair beside Jack, giving me a look both reassuring and grounding. You're here now, she said. That's what matters. Dinner arrived in a flurry of motion. My chicken was rerouted from my old table to this one, landing in front of me with a flourish from the server, who winked like he approved of the relocation. Conversation swelled around me. Daniel asked where I lived. Lily wanted to know my favorite holiday movie. Finch complained about the cold in Boston, compared to San Diego where he used to live. Clark talked about dinosaurs at a volume that suggested no one had ever told him to. Tone it down. No one asked why I was alone. No one pushed. No one looked at me with pity. They handed me dishes, told me stories, and made space without making a spectacle of it. The table felt steady beneath my hands, like something meant to hold weight. At one point, while the others argued about the best pie flavor, Margaret leaned slightly toward me and spoke quietly. Everyone deserves a place to sit, she said. Even if they haven't always had one. The words hit something deep in me. Not painful, just true. A truth I didn't know I needed to hear. I nodded, swallowing past something tight in my throat. Thank you, I said, for inviting me. Her eyes softened, lines fanning at the corners. Gratitude is lovely, she said, but unnecessary. You're exactly where you should be. The conversation pulled me back in then. Someone asking me if I liked sweet potato casserole. Clark insisting I try a bite of his dessert because it tasted like cinnamon clouds. The room felt warmer, my shoulders loosening without me telling them to. For the first time that day, maybe for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was not on the outside of something looking in, not pressing my face to a fogged window hoping someone would open a door. I was at a table, a real one that didn't require me to earn my place. The warmth of that realization settled slowly, spreading through me with each passing moment. Later, when dinner plates were scraped clean and someone ordered coffee for the whole table, Margaret caught my eye again. Her voice was gentle, but certain. No one should eat alone on Christmas. The sentence settled in my chest like a seed, small and steady, something that would grow roots long before I realized it. When the server refilled my coffee, I wrapped my hands around the mug and breathed in the rising steam. Outside the window, snow continued to fall. Inside, the room glowed with laughter and warmth. I sat there, feeling the weight of the day shift once more, piece by piece, like something quietly rearranged itself inside me. And for the first time, I didn't feel like running. The warmth of the room lingered on my skin long after I set my coffee cup down. The Lowells were still talking, still teasing each other, still passing dishes back and forth like they had done it 1,000 times. I let myself breathe in the scene for another quiet moment before pushing back my chair and standing. Margaret rose with me, touching my elbow lightly as if to steady the moment rather than my balance. The others began gathering their coats, sliding chairs across the wooden floor, still immersed in their conversations. It was a kind of chaos that felt practiced, familiar, comfortable. I followed them to the front of the restaurant, where the cold from outside seeped through the glass of the door. Jack tugged on his gloves, muttering something about how the wind would be sharp enough to cut someone in half tonight. Daniel offered to walk Lily and Clark to the car. Finch was arguing with the hostess about the difference between cocoa powder and chocolate syrup in the dessert he'd ordered. The kind of argument no one wins and no one cares about enough to walk away from. Margaret stepped aside with me for a moment, letting her family handle their own commotion. Her eyes were soft but keen, like she saw things most people miss. "You handled yourself well at the table," she said. I blinked, caught off guard. "I'm not sure what you mean. Most people who sit with strangers on Christmas feel the need to talk too much or too little. You didn't. You just fit in. Not forced, not performing. It was nice." Her words warmed me more than the coffee had. "Thank you," I murmured. Jack called across the room, asking if anyone had seen his scarf. Lily said he was wearing it. He checked his neck and nodded proudly like she had just solved a national mystery. Margaret smiled at the exchange, then turned back to me. "We do this every year," she said. "Christmas dinner. Sometimes it is just us. Sometimes someone brings a friend. Sometimes we find someone who needs a seat." I felt something shift inside me at that. A realization, maybe, or the start of one. "I hope it wasn't obvious," I said softly. "But I really appreciated being included." It wasn't obvious. It was honest. She said it like a fact, not a compliment. I pulled my coat tighter as Jack finally managed the door and a blast of cold air rushed in. People began filing out one by one, heading toward a small cluster of cars parked along the street. I hesitated by the doorway. A part of me didn't want to leave. Another part felt like staying too long would make the moment feel fragile, like it might crack under the weight of expectation. Before I could choose, Margaret reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small cream-colored card. "Just in case," she said. I looked down at the card resting in my palm. Margaret Lowell. Her number printed neatly beneath her name. No title, no company. Just a person giving another person a way to reach her. My throat tightened unexpectedly. "Thank you," I whispered. "Really." She squeezed my hand, then stepped into the cold, her breath forming a pale cloud in the air. Her family gathered around her, Daniel buckling Clark into a booster seat, Finch still arguing with Jack about the dessert, Lily tugging on her gloves while half singing a tune I didn't recognize. I watched them a moment longer before I stepped out onto the sidewalk myself. The cold hit harder now, sharp against my cheeks. I pulled my scarf up to my chin and began walking down the block. I hadn't gone more than a few steps when my phone vibrated in my pocket. For half a heartbeat, I let myself imagine it was my mom, or my dad, or even Paige. Something simple like "Merry Christmas" or "Are you okay?" I pulled the phone out. Nothing. Just a calendar alert reminding me I had a work deadline the following week. I stared at the screen for a long moment, letting the truth settle in the way cold settles deep into your bones. If you stand, still too long. No message from anyone in my family. Not a missed call. Not a text. Not even an accidental pocket dial. The sidewalk suddenly felt wider, emptier. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and kept walking. A car drove by slowly, holiday lights blinking in its back window. A couple laughed loudly from across the street. Somewhere above me, the faint hum of an apartment heater rattled. Normal sounds. Ordinary sounds, life sounds. But none of them felt connected to me. I walked until the restaurant lights faded behind me and Beacon Hills quieter. Side streets opened up, lined with brownstones and wrought iron railings dusted with snow. I stopped beneath a street lamp and exhaled a long, steady breath. It came out white, curling into the night before fading away. The thing about silence is that it can feel like abandonment or relief, depending on who you are waiting to hear from. Tonight, it felt like both. I kept moving, hands buried deep in my pockets, Margaret's card still warm against my palm through the fabric. I thought about her words at the table, the way she said them like she was stating a universal truth. Everyone deserves a place to sit. The sentence clung to me as I walked back toward my apartment. Boston's nighttime lights reflected off patches of ice on the sidewalk, turning them amber and blue. A few people passed me, bundled up, talking quietly. No one looked at me twice. By the time I reached my building, the hallway smelled faintly of someone's burnt cookies, and the heat clicked on with a metallic groan. I climbed the stairs, each step bringing me back to the familiarity of my small apartment. Inside, it was warm but still. The lamp cast a soft glow on the kitchen counter, where my torn plane ticket sat in, the trash, edges curling. I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around me again. But it felt different this time. Less like emptiness, more like space. The kind that could hold something new if I let it. I set my coat on the back of a chair and pulled Margaret's card from my pocket. I traced the letters of her name with my thumb. A stranger had seen me on Christmas. Not for what I lacked, not for what I failed at, but for the simple truth that I was alone. And instead of turning away, she made room. I placed the card on the counter, careful not to bend it. It struck me then in a way that made my chest tighten. Kindness does not require blood. It does not require history, or permission, or obligation. It requires choice. And someone, for the first time in a long time, had chosen me without asking me to shrink or explain or earn the right to be there. I let out a slow breath and leaned against the counter, the warmth of the apartment settling around me like a blanket. The night outside deepened. Someone's TV murmured through the wall. A door down the hall opened and shut. Life is moving again. I reached for a glass of water, took a long sip, and set it down. My fingers brushed the edge of Margaret's card. Just in case, she had said. It was strange how 3 words from someone you barely knew could settle deeper than 30 years of silence from people who claimed to love you. I stood there in my quiet kitchen as the weight of the day softened, piece by piece, sinking into something less sharp, less heavy. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel entirely invisible. I turned off the light, leaving only the faint glow from the street filtering in through the window, and walked toward my bedroom. Tomorrow will be different. I didn't know how. Not yet, but I could feel the shift. It had already begun. I woke up the morning after Christmas with the same quiet in my apartment, but something in me had shifted. It was small at first, more like an adjustment in how the air felt, or the way my shoulders settled when I stood at the sink brushing my teeth. But it was real. A change had happened, and it was mine. By early January, I was back at work in the financial planning office near Back Bay, where my days were a mix of spreadsheets, client calls, and the kind of meetings that made people feel important without actually doing much. 2 weeks into the new year, I submitted my application for a part-time MBA program through Northeastern. I did it at my kitchen table at 11:30 at night, the glow of my laptop reflecting off a half-empty mug of tea. No ceremony, no announcement, no family call afterward. The confirmation email came the next morning while I was reviewing a budget projection. I clicked it open, read it twice, then took a slow breath. It felt different than the day I got my acceptance letter to undergrad. Back then, I ran into the living room waving the envelope like it was a prize I had stolen. My mom said that was nice. My dad said to keep my expectations manageable. Paige asked if the school had good parties. This time, no one said anything because no one knew. And somehow, it felt better that way. Spring of 2020 arrived with a strange mix of optimism and exhaustion. I worked full-time, took 2 classes at night, and lived most of my days inside a narrow loop between home, work, and campus. I packed little single-serving meals in plastic containers, carried my laptop everywhere, and learned to make coffee strong enough to pass as a survival tactic. Some nights, my eyes burned from staring at a screen for too long, and my brain felt like it had turned into wet cement. But I didn't quit, not once. The thing that surprised me most was how quiet loneliness felt after a while. It was not dramatic or sharp. It was dull, steady, familiar. I got used to eating alone, walking alone, studying alone. There were moments when I reached for my phone automatically to text my mom or my dad, some small thing I wanted to share, but the instinct faded week by week until the silence felt normal. Margaret checked in sometimes. Not every day. Not enough to feel intrusive. Just enough to remind me I existed in someone's mental landscape. You should come for dinner on Sunday. We are having chili tonight. Arthur made too much. Lily wants you to critique her science project, but only if you are free. Little notes. Steady ones. The first time I went back to the Lowell house after Christmas, snow was melting unevenly along the edges of the walkway, forming patches of slush that sparkled under the porch light. Margaret opened the door before I could knock twice, greeting me with warmth that felt instinctive rather than polite. Arthur offered to take my coat, then insisted I stay for dessert even though I said I could not. Julianing was there too, leaning against the kitchen counter with a beer in his hand, listening while Finch described some ridiculous work fiasco about a client who insisted every presentation slide use the color orange. Julian did not say much that night. He nodded sometimes, smiled once or twice, and watched the room with a kind of attention that made it clear he did not speak, unless he had something worth saying. When I left, he held the door for me, lingering in the hallway a beat longer than necessary. "Drive safe," he said. I walked home through the cold night air, wondering why those two words echoed the whole way back. By summer, life had become a rhythm, a demanding one, but a rhythm nonetheless. Work, class, sleep, repeat. My bank account dipped low sometimes, forcing me to get creative with groceries and delayed payments. My evenings were spent reading case studies, highlighting paragraphs until my wrist cramped. I learned the precise number of minutes it took to walk from my office to the T station at rush hour, and which nights the campus library stayed open late enough for me to finish an assignment before the last train. Sometimes I cried from exhaustion, the quiet kind you wipe with the palm of your hand while no one is watching. Other times I caught myself smiling in the middle of a lecture just because I understood something complicated without second-guessing myself. I never once thought about calling home. Not for advice, not for comfort, not for acknowledgement. The absence of expectation freed something inside me I had not realized was trapped. Through 2021, the Lowell family became more woven into my days, not by force, more by gravity. A natural pull toward something warm. I spent Sunday evenings at their house, usually squeezed between Finch and Lily on the couch, watching whatever show they were collectively obsessed with that month. Margaret always tried to send me home with leftovers. Arthur insisted on teaching me card games that involved rules only he understood. Julie and I talked more. Not a lot at first, short conversations. A comment about a class I was taking. A question about a project he was working on. He was steady in a way that made it easy to relax around him, even though I did not understand yet why that mattered. In the fall, when the city cooled and leaves turned the sidewalks gold and brown, Julie helped me replace a broken latch on a window in my apartment. We stood there afterward, both slightly dusty, looking at the newly fixed frame like it was some grand accomplishment. He laughed quietly, a low, warm sound, and it startled something in me awake. Later that night, I caught myself replaying that laugh in my head and had to remind myself not to read too much into things. He was kind. He was decent. He had no reason to see me as anything more than a friend of the family. But still, something grew. Slow, quiet, solid. By the time 2022 rolled around, I had passed the midpoint of my MBA program. I could read financial models in half the time it used to take. I negotiated a small raise at work after building a report that saved my team dozens of hours each quarter. My schedule was still tight, my bank account still modest, but something had changed. I was not living to prove anything to anyone. For the first time in my life, I was moving entirely for myself. The realization came to me one late evening as I sat on my couch surrounded by open textbooks and loose papers. I was highlighting a line in a case study about risk assessment and noticed my hand was steady, my breath even, no tension in my shoulders. I was tired, yes, always tired. But I was also proud. Proud in a way I had never allowed myself to be. Proud without imagining anyone else's face. proud without waiting for approval. I set the highlighter down and leaned back, letting the moment sink into my bones. I was doing fine. In fact, I was doing better than fine. Not because I had something to prove, because I had finally stopped proving it. Around that same time, Margaret invited me to a small family gathering for Arthur's birthday. I brought a pie from a bakery near my apartment because I had not mastered the art of baking anything that required more than one step. Lily shrieked when she saw me at the door, grabbing my hand and dragging me straight to the dining room where she had set up some elaborate display of cards and drawings she wanted me to see. Julian was there too, standing near the kitchen doorway, wearing a navy sweater that made his eyes look warmer than usual. He smiled at me, a soft smile that reached his eyes, and something tightened and loosened at the same time in my chest. I handed Arthur the pie. He said it was too much. I said it was nothing. Julian murmured that fruit pies were Arthur's weakness. Arthur laughed and denied it, then asked someone to get plates. The room felt easy, familiar, like I had been walking into that house for years instead of months. Later, when I stepped outside to leave, Julian walked me to my car. The night was crisp, the sky clear enough that you could see a handful of stars through the city glow. My breath formed little clouds as I exhaled. "You doing all right with school?" he asked quietly. "Better than all right," I said. He nodded once, pockets stuffed into his coat, watching me with a thoughtful expression. "Good. You deserve that." The words landed deeper than I expected. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how close he was standing. "Thank you," I whispered. He stepped back then, giving me space, but his voice held a warmth I felt long after I drove away. "See you Sunday." And for the first time, those 3 words did not feel like a routine parting. They felt like a promise. By the end of the year, my life had become something I never predicted. I had a demanding job, a demanding degree, and a demanding schedule. But I also had something steady. A place to sit on Sundays. People who looked for me when I walked through the door. A quiet thread of connection with Julian that neither of us rushed. I never once heard from my mom or my dad. Not a birthday message, not a holiday call, not a single word. If Paige got married, I did not know. If my parents moved, I did not know. If anything happened in that household, I knew only one truth. My absence had made no noticeable dent. And yet, somehow, I was not shattered by that fact. I was living a life built without permission, without apology, without shrinking myself so someone else could stand taller. One evening in early winter, after a long study session, I sat by my window with a cup of tea, watching the city lights shimmer against the snow. I rested my hand against the cold glass, letting the contrast of warmth and chill settle into me. I was no one's afterthought anymore, no one's placeholder. No one's backup plan. I belonged to my own life now, and slowly, quietly, that life was beginning to expand in ways I had not expected yet. The kind of ways that would eventually pull me into something much bigger than I realized that night as I sat alone in my apartment with a stack of textbooks and a steady heart. Something that would lead me somewhere I could not yet see. Snow was still drifting across the sidewalk when Julian and I stepped into the world. The lobby of the Harwell Plaza Hotel. The place looked like it had been carved out of gold. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, polished brass railings that gleamed under soft white lights. The kind of place where a person like me usually walked in with a purpose, not as a guest. I tried to tell myself this was just another fancy Boston wedding, nothing more, nothing less. I had no reason to expect anything else. Not yet. People in gowns and tailored suits drifted toward the grand ballroom as a pair of violinists played near the entrance. Julian reached for my hand, not squeezing, just resting his fingers lightly against mine. I could tell he was excited to introduce me to his circle. I was ready for a normal night. A pleasant one, even. We reached the edge of the ballroom, where servers in crisp white jackets carried trays of champagne. Soft chatter rolled across the room like warm air. The ceremony had already ended, and guests were moving through cocktail hour in loose clusters. I scanned the space out of habit, not out of nervousness. And then something inside me went still. Near the tall, arched window, under an enormous floral installation of white roses and eucalyptus, stood my family. My dad is in a dark navy suit, Mom in a pale silver gown, Paige in white lace, laughing beside a man I assumed was her new husband. The Hale family stood near them, tall men in tuxedos and women in sleek gowns that looked like they had been tailored that morning. My throat tightened with a shock so sudden it felt physical. Julian was mid-sentence when I stopped walking. His hand slipped from mine as he turned to look at me. I could not pull my eyes away from that corner of the room. For a heartbeat, I hoped maybe my mind was tricking me. But no, they were there, all of them. And not one person had mentioned my sister was getting married. I felt my breath leave me in a slow, controlled stream. I had two choices: walk away quietly, or walk forward and stand in front of the people who taught me how to pretend everything was fine. I chose forward. Julian frowned slightly, confused, but followed a step behind me as I moved across the room. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the air itself was thickening. Paige's laugh carried across the space, bright and effortless. She had no idea I was there. Neither did they. I stopped just a few feet from them. My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. The calm that settled over me felt unnatural, almost clinical. I waited until my dad turned his head slightly, catching movement in his peripheral vision. His eyes landed on me. It hit him first. Recognition. Then confusion. Then something darker, something like panic, before his expression reset into a hard, polished mask. "Hi, missed me?" My voice was steady, almost conversational. It floated up between us like a ribbon of cold air. My dad blinked once, then again, and then, loud enough for the nearest guest to hear, he said, "We do not know this woman." The words came out sharp enough to cut. Mom turned instantly, her hand tightening around her clutch. Her expression twisted in a way I had seen only a few times in my life, those rare moments when she thought I might embarrass her. She stepped closer to my dad and said, "She is not part of our family. She abandoned us years ago." A few heads turned. Conversations softened. Music drifted into the background like it was shrinking away from the moment. I opened my mouth, not to argue, not to defend myself, just to breathe. But my dad lifted a hand slightly, as if to silence even that. "You should leave," he said. "This is a private event." Behind him, Paige had gone quiet. Her smile had frozen, her new husband glancing between all of us with growing confusion. Someone from the Hale family looked at Mom with a raised eyebrow. The discomfort spread like a crack in glass. Julie appeared at my side, his voice low. "Who are they?" I swallowed once before answering. "My parents." Mom let out a soft, bitter laugh. "That is generous, considering what she did to us." Julian stiffened. He looked from me to them, trying to make sense of something that had no logic at all. My dad straightened his jacket and addressed the nearest guests as though he were giving a speech. "She ran off with some man years ago, cut off all contact, left us to deal with everything alone. We went through very hard times because of her selfish choices." I felt the room tilt. The lies were too clean, too practiced. They had told this story before. Many times. Paige stepped forward, lowering her voice as if trying to keep the attention off her. "Not tonight, my dad. Please. Can we not do this?" But my dad was in full performance mode, loud enough now that more guests were turning to listen. Even the servers slowed their steps. "Paige suffered the most," he continued, shaking his head like a disappointed preacher. "She tried so hard to hold the family together while her sister refused to help, would not even visit, would not contribute when we needed her." The air around me burned cold. Something inside me folded in on itself, not breaking, just contracting into a smaller, harder shape. I lifted my chin slightly. "My dad." "That is not what happened." He cut me off with a sharp gesture. "Enough. You made your choices. Do not come here and try to ruin your sister's day after ignoring this family for so long." My voice died in my throat, not from fear, not from guilt, from clarity, pure, icy clarity. Nothing I said here would stay true once it left my mouth. They would twist it, reshape it, turn it into proof of whatever lie they needed next. There was no winning, no correction, no repair. Julie stepped closer, placing a hand gently against the center of my back. His touch was steady, grounding. He looked at my dad, then Mom, then Paige. His voice was calm, but there was an edge I had never heard from him before. "Enough. We are leaving." My dad scoffed. "Sensible choice. She has always been dramatic." A few gasps rippled from the guests nearby. Someone whispered, "I did not know Paige had a sister." That did something to me. I could not explain it. Hearing strangers say the words so softly, like a piece of trivia that had been hidden until tonight, made something inside my chest settle. Not break. Settle. I took one last look at Paige. Her eyes darted away, shame flickering across her face before she masked it with a smile aimed at the ensign. Hail, family. Julian guided me through the ballroom entrance, his hand still steady on my back. Each step away felt heavier and lighter at the same time. I did not look back. I did not need to. By the time the doors closed behind us and the music faded into a distant hum, I felt the silence wrap around me like a coat. Not empty, not weak, just final. We stepped into the hallway, the soft gold lights casting a gentle glow across the marble floor. Julian did not speak. He waited. He always waited for me to breathe first. I drew in a slow breath and let it out through my nose. My legs felt steady. My hands were no longer cold. "Let's go," I said. And we walked toward the exit, away from the people who had just erased me in front of a room full of strangers, and toward whatever came next. The cold outside hit my face like fresh air after a long, stale room. I kept walking. I did not look back. Snowflakes clung to my coat as Julian and I walked toward his car, the cold settling over us like a second, quieter version of what had just happened. He unlocked the door and waited for me to get in first. He did not touch me, not yet, but he stayed close enough that I could feel the steadiness radiating off him. When he finally closed his door and started the engine, the heater hummed faintly, pushing warm air forward in slow waves. His hand hovered near mine on the console, not quite touching, just there. Present. Ready. Patient. The city lights blurred past my window as the car eased onto Boylston Street. I could hear the thud of my heartbeat in my ears, steady, dull, almost like it belonged to someone else. No words would come, not even the simple ones. I sat there stunned, watching the snow fall in the streetlights, replaying every second of the scene in that ballroom. I had expected distance from them, maybe cold politeness. Maybe a nod. I had even considered the possibility that they might turn their backs, but I had not expected that. The lies, the performance, the way my dad's voice grew stronger with each accusation, like he had been rehearsing it. The way Mom's eyes sharpened the moment she realized she could use the moment to reinforce the story she wanted the world to believe. I pressed a hand to my chest, as if something inside me needed steadying. Julie Bien broke the silence softly. "Let me know if you want me to pull over." I shook my head. "No, I am okay." The words came out too calm, too even, the same tone I had used earlier in the ballroom. He did not push. He simply kept driving, the wipers sliding back and forth in slow arcs. The city looked different through the windshield, like everything had softened except the ache inside my ribs. Somewhere near Copley Square, the quiet inside the car shifted. Not broken, just rearranged. I thought about the whispers I heard behind me before I left. Not loud, but clear enough to carve into the moment. Paige's sister ran off years ago. She caused so much grief for the family. I heard she refused to help when her dad was sick. How could Lowell's son go with her? Each sentence came back to me like a tiny shard of ice landing on my skin. They did not say it with malice. They said it like it was fact. Like it was something everyone already knew. Like it had been repeated enough times that no one questioned it. That was the part that made my stomach drop. This was not a story invented in panic. It had weight, familiarity, muscle memory. They had been telling this story for years. My whole timeline rearranged itself in my mind. The silence from them, the sudden coldness, the refusal to call, the way no one reached out after Christmas. They had not just let me go. They had rewritten me. A version of me that was easier to despise, easier to blame, easier to fold into a narrative where Paige was the martyr and I was the reckless, selfish sister who had abandoned them. Julian turned into a quiet side street near my apartment and parked. He kept the engine running for warmth. He looked over at me, his voice low. "Do you want to talk about it?" I stared at the dashboard for a moment. The air felt thick, like speaking might break something open that I had been holding together for too long. But then a different thought formed, slow, and deliberate. If I stayed silent now, Julian would only ever see the version of me my parents had crafted. If he was going to be part of my future, he needed the truth. Not because I needed sympathy, but because lies had shaped too much of my life already. I turned toward him. Yes, I think I need to. He nodded once, the same steady gesture he had made the night we met, as if he were bracing without fear. So I told him. I started with the simplest thing. The SUV argument. How Paige insisted I buy her a new car as a Christmas and wedding gift because I supposedly made more money. How she twisted my refusal into proof of jealousy. How my dad immediately agreed with her, calling me unsupportive, selfish, and ungrateful. Then I told him about Christmas Eve, the call. My dad told me not to come home. The way the silence afterward felt like the house had swallowed me whole. Julian stayed quiet, listening closely. Not interrupting, not reacting too quickly, not jumping in with solutions. That alone made it easier to keep talking. I moved through the rest. The favoritism, the years of strained conversations, the way Mom always defended Paige no matter how outrageous she was, the way I had been blamed for things I had not done since I was a child, the slow unraveling of the relationship until I finally stepped away, and then the lies I heard tonight, how they had been molded into something cleaner and easier to sell, a story that removed their guilt and replaced it with mine. I felt something crack in my voice when I said, I knew they did not like who I was. But I did not know they hated who they needed me to be. Julie vanished toward me then, gently taking my hand. I let him. My fingers felt stiff, cold, but his were warm. I'm going to show you something, I said quietly. I dug into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened an old folder I had not looked at in a long time. It held screenshots, missed calls, the last voicemail Mom ever left me. It was short. Sharp. A single sentence telling me I needed to grow up. I handed the phone to Julian without speaking. He scrolled through slowly, his brow furrowing, then softening, then tightening again. He set the phone down gently on the console, as if it were something fragile and alive. You did not deserve any of that, he said, his voice almost a whisper. Not one part of it. Something in my chest loosened enough for me to take a deeper breath. Not for pity, but because it pulled me out of the version of myself my family had carved for, their convenience. I was not the girl who ran away. I was not the selfish sister. I was not the embarrassment they had painted for the Hale family. I was a person who had been rewritten. But now I had said the truth to someone who mattered, someone who would remember it correctly. Julian squeezed my hand gently. We can go inside if you want, or we can drive, or sit. Whatever you need. What I needed, for the first time in a long time, was simple. To be heard, to be known, to not be molded by anyone else again. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who had seen one of the worst moments of my life and had not flinched or pulled away. I exhaled. Let's go inside. We got out of the car. The cold air wrapped around us again. But it felt different now, sharper but less invasive, almost like it was clearing the path in front of me. Julian walked beside me all the way to my apartment door. Neither of us spoke. We did not need to. Inside, the quiet was warm, familiar, mine. I hung my coat on the hook near the door and turned around. Julian was watching me with a look that was not pity or panic. It was something steadier, something that told me he was not overwhelmed by the weight of what he had heard. It told me I had done the right thing. I sat on the couch, pulling my legs up under me. Julia began the chair across from me, giving me space but staying close enough that I could feel the calm coming off him in steady waves. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, in a voice so gentle it surprised me, "You are stronger than you think." I shook my head once, almost laughing. I do not feel strong. You do not have to feel it to be it. I let that sit there for a moment, settling into the quiet like a stone sinking into water. The truth had finally been said. Not the version they had written, not the story strangers whispered behind my back. The real one. And for the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not grief. Something closer to ownership. the beginning of reclaiming myself. Julie stayed until I told him I was ready to sleep. He hugged me once before he left, a steady, grounding hug that did not rush or tighten, just held, long enough to remind me that not every connection in my life was built on conditions. When the door closed behind him and I stood alone in the quiet of my apartment, I let myself breathe in the stillness. Tonight had broken something, but it had also begun to rebuild something else. I was finally standing in the story that belonged to me, not the one they had invented. And I was not stepping back. I woke the next morning with the feeling of someone sitting on my chest, not heavy enough to stop me from breathing, just heavy enough that every breath came with effort. Light seeped through the blinds in thin gray lines. The city was quiet in that winter way, where even noise felt muffled. I stayed in bed longer than I meant to, staring at the ceiling, replaying fragments of the wedding like quick flashes of film projected against the dark. By afternoon, the ache in my ribs had dulled into something steadier, something I could move through without breaking. I made tea, answered work emails, folded laundry with slow, deliberate movements. I kept waiting for my phone to buzz, for some familiar number to flash across the screen, for anyone to say something, an apology, a question, a single word. Nothing came. On the third day, I had just stepped out of the shower when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. A Boston area code, but not one saved in my contacts. For a second, I considered ignoring it. Spam calls almost always came at the worst moments, but something in my gut told me to answer. I swiped the screen and lifted the phone. Hello? A breath, then another, and then my dad's voice. How are you? His tone was light, too light, as if this were a casual check-in, like he had not looked me in the eye 3 nights ago and told an entire room of people that he did not know me. Before I could react, Mom's voice slid in. Did you get home safely? We were worried when you left so suddenly. The room felt suddenly smaller. I sat down on the edge of my bed, one hand braced on my knee. You two called me from the same phone? Well, my dad said, the Hale family has been here going over some things. We happened to be in the same room. I stayed silent, the kind of silence that is not passive, but sharp. Mom cleared her throat. We wanted to talk to you about the other night, just to make sure we are all on the same page. My jaw tightened. About what? A pause, and then Mom said it. Her voice soft at first, then firming into something practiced. You need to keep quiet about what happened at the wedding. There it was, the real reason. I did not speak. Not because I was shocked. Because I already knew that sentence was coming. I could feel it forming from miles away. Mom continued, rushing slightly now, as if she feared the window for persuasion might close. Paige's marriage depends on stability and reputation. You know how private the Hale family is. Anything said, any rumor, could cause irreversible damage to her future. Irreversible damage. The words tasted metallic, like she was warning me of a crime I had not committed. My dad exhaled sharply into the receiver. You have already caused enough pain. Just let this go. Let this go. As if the version of me they had invented had not been in circulation for years. As if my silence was the only thing preventing the truth from unraveling. I let the quiet stretch. It was not a dramatic pause. It was me deciding whether I owed them anything at all. Whether I needed to cushion their fear or soften the edges of their lies. I finally said quietly, I hear what you are saying. Mom's relief came in a quick breath. Good. We knew you would understand. This is what is best for everyone. I did not agree. I did not promise anything. I was not reassured. I simply let their words fall into the space between us without giving them something to grip. My dad tried again, his voice tightening. Do not make this harder than it already is. I looked out my window at the snow melting on the fire escape. Harder, I wanted to ask? For whom? But I felt no need to offer them a doorway back into my thoughts. I ended the call without saying goodbye. The silence in my apartment felt different afterward, less like emptiness and more like something settling into its correct place. I sat there for a long moment, the phone still in my hand, letting the weight of the conversation roll through me. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what they had done. Only fear, only control. Only the expectation that I would play along, the way I always had when I was younger. I set the phone down and inhaled slowly. That evening, Julian picked me up for dinner at his parents' house. Margaret had texted earlier in the day, inviting me over for a quiet meal and insisting she would not take no for an answer. There was something soothing about her confidence, the way she assumed I belonged in their home. It softened something inside me. When we walked into the Lowell house, the smell of roasted vegetables filled the air. Margaret was stirring something on the stove when she turned and saw me. Her face softened instantly, and she wiped her hands on a towel before coming closer. I hugged her without thinking. It surprised both of us, but she held on. Arthur emerged from the living room holding a stack of plates. He nodded at me with a quiet, steady kindness that always felt like an anchor. During dinner, they did not ask about the wedding. They talked about a book they were reading, a new bakery that had opened in Cambridge, and a neighbor who kept planting tulips even though squirrels kept digging them up. They gave me space to breathe without feeling watched. It was only after the dishes were cleared and we were all sitting with tea that Arthur looked at me and said gently, "If there is anything you want to tell us, we are here." Julian had not told them. He had waited for me to speak. I set my cup down. My throat felt tight, but not with fear, with decision. I told them everything, not with the frantic rush I had used when I first told Julian, not with shaking hands or breaking voices. I told it plainly, piece by piece. The argument with Paige, the SUV demand, my dad's reaction, the Christmas ban, the years of silence, the lies told at the wedding, the phone call earlier that day. Margaret listened with her hand resting lightly against her chest, her eyes wide with a kind of quiet heartbreak. Arthur sat forward, elbows on his knees, his expression calm but intense. The way a person looks when they are trying to understand something that contradicts everything they believe about decency. When I finished, the room stayed quiet for a beat. Then Margaret reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "Truth protects the right people," she said. Her voice was soft but sure. Arthur nodded slowly. "And you are not alone anymore." The words settled over me like a blanket pulled up over my shoulders. I did not realize how badly I needed to hear them until they were spoken. I felt my eyes sting, not with tears of sadness, but with something closer to release. Julian shifted slightly in his chair, looking at me with that same steady expression he had held since the wedding. He had not faltered once. The rest of the evening was quiet, grounded. Margaret sent me home with leftovers even though I insisted I was fine. Arthur insisted on walking us to the car. Julian held my hand on the drive back, not saying much, just gently brushing his thumb across my knuckles from time to time like he was, reminding me he was there. When I stepped into my apartment that night, the silence felt different again. Not like emptiness, not like isolation. It felt like clarity. What my parents wanted from me was not peace. It was compliance. Agreement, a willingness to live inside the version of me they had created. But the truth had finally been spoken to people who cared. People who believed me. People who did not need me to shrink or apologize to be loved. For the first time, I chose honesty over keeping the peace. And it felt like turning on a light in a room I had been stumbling through for years. Snow had turned to a thin, dirty slush along the sidewalks by the time the stories from the wedding began circulating through the quieter corners of Boston. I did not hear them firsthand. That was the strange part. They came to me sideways, like drafts of cold air sneaking through cracks in a window frame. A friend of a colleague mentioned she had heard a dramatic scene unfold at a high society wedding. A woman at a coffee shop muttered something about the Hale family being stricter than people realized. None of them knew I was connected. None of them knew they were brushing close to the truth. Boston's wealthy social circle was smaller than anyone wanted to admit. Stories traveled fast there, faster even than facts. And this time, the facts were starting to matter. It started when someone at the wedding mentioned to a Hale relative that they had always thought Paige was this picture-perfect girl with the perfect family. Then they added that it was a little strange when some woman walked up claiming to be her sister. A sister no one had ever heard of. A sister the Whitmores flat out denied knowing. Inconsistencies. Tiny cracks in a story that was supposed to be smooth. People pretended not to care, but enough eyebrows were raised to make someone in the Hale family pull at one of those threads and see if anything unraveled. And it did. I was at work, trying to review a quarterly risk report, when Julian texted me, "Something is going on with the Hales. Call me later." That was all. I did not respond right away. I sat with the phone in my hand, letting the words sink in, letting my heart settle into a steady rhythm. I knew it was coming. I had known from the moment my dad's voice rose in that ballroom. That afternoon, I heard the first whisper that Paige's husband was asking questions. Real ones. Not the polite kind. Someone in the Hale family had quietly pulled background checks, reaching out to acquaintances and tracing connections. That was when the truth began leaking out. Not my truth, the truth of their lies. A coworker waved her hand in front of me. "Are you all right? You look pale." I nodded, just tired. But that was not it. It was something else. Something like watching a storm gather from the inside of a warm room. I could see the lightning forming, but felt none of the wind on my skin. Later that evening, Julian told me what he had learned. A friend of his who knew someone in the Hale legal team said the marriage license had not been filed yet. It was sitting on a desk, waiting. The Hale family wanted more information before finalizing anything. Paige's husband, who barely looked at me the night of the wedding, was said to be furious. And not at me. At Paige, because he'd just found out she had been spinning this story for years about a selfish sister who abandoned the family and broke their parents' hearts. She never admitted there were two sides to anything. She never mentioned doubt. She never mentioned choice. He believed her without blinking. Until now. Until he realized the so-called awful sister Paige kept warning him about was his best friend's fiancé. The one he heard was cutting off from her family. The more he learned, the more questions he asked. Why had she lied? Why had she exaggerated? Why had she painted herself as the victim and me as the monster? Suddenly, her carefully woven story did not look so pretty under the harsh light of someone else's scrutiny. And then the calls started. My dad called first. The phone buzzed twice before going quiet. I watched it light up with his name and then darken again. I let it ring. He called again an hour later, and again that night. I declined each call like it was a reflex, like muscle memory. The next morning, Mom's texts began. "You are ruining your sister's life. Say nothing to anyone. Fix this." Every message pressed harder on the bruise they had created. None said, "I am sorry." None said we should not have done that. None said we hurt you, just commands. Blame. Demands for silence. I set the phone face down on my desk and walked to the kitchen, letting the kettle boil while my thoughts gathered themselves. Fix this. The words repeated themselves like an echo in my mind. Fix what? The truth they had shattered? The story they had created? The consequences that finally caught up? Around noon, the phone rang again. My dad's number this time. I let it go to voicemail. Then Mom tried, then my dad again. They alternated like they were passing the phone back and forth, building an urgent rhythm I refused to sync with. When the fourth call came, I answered. I did not speak first. Mom's voice burst through the speaker, tight and frantic. "You need to stop whatever you are doing. The Hales are reconsidering everything. Paige is devastated. They think she lied. They think we lied. You have to stop this." I stood at my kitchen counter, watching steam curl out of my mug. "I have not said anything," I replied quietly. "That is not the point," Mom snapped. "People are talking. They are digging. They are asking questions. And they are finding things they should not find." "You mean the truth," I said. A sharp inhale. "We need you to promise you will not speak to anyone about this. Not the Hales. Not anyone in that social circle. In fact, do not tell anyone you are our daughter at all. Just do not. It is complicated." There it was, the real request, the one beneath all the frantic noise. "Erase yourself for us." Again, my voice came out level, almost gentle. "Mom." She stopped speaking. I could hear her breathing, fast and shallow. "I will not lie for you." Silence, round and full, spread across the line. It lasted long enough that I wondered if she had hung up. Then she exhaled in a shaky burst, like my words had knocked the air out of her. "If you do not help us," she whispered, "Paige's marriage may not survive this." "That is not my responsibility," I said. and it never was. For a moment, I thought my dad might take the phone, but no one else spoke. I ended the call. This time I did not wait for it to ring again. I blocked the number. Both numbers. I sat there with the phone still warm in my hand, feeling something inside me shift into a position it should have taken years ago. I was not the cleanup crew. Not the scapegoat. Not the person who smoothed the edges of their bad decisions just so they could keep pretending nothing was wrong. I felt a strange mix of calm and clarity, like I was stepping out of a fog and finally seeing the shape of my own outline. Later that evening, Julian came over with takeout from a small Thai place near Cambridge. We ate quietly, both of us pretending it was a normal night, even though it was not. Between bites of curry, he reached across the table and touched my wrist. "You look lighter," he said. "Not happier, just lighter." I nodded. I finally drew a line. He smiled once, a small, respectful smile. About time. When he left, I walked to the window and watched the streetlights shine against the thin layer of frown, snow still clinging to the road. Cars passed in slow intervals. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and then faded. My parents were unraveling. Their lies were unraveling. Their image was unraveling. And none of it had required anything from me except the one thing I had never given them before. A boundary. For the first time in my life, I felt the ground beneath me hold steady as I walked away from them. Not in anger, not in grief, but in truth. And I did not look back. Snow fell lightly outside my apartment window the morning the news finally reached me. I was pouring coffee, the kitchen still dim, when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message from Celia Brooks, one of Julian's friends, someone who had been at the wedding but lived far enough from the center of the place. Drama, to speak plainly. "Call me when you're up. Something you should know." I dialed her while the coffee was still steaming in my mug. She picked up on the first ring. "Okay, so," she said, lowering her voice as if someone might overhear her through the phone. "I am not sure how much you want to know about your sister's situation, but things have changed." My stomach tightened. What happened? Her breath came out in a slow exhale. The marriage license expired. The Hale family never signed it. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. The words hung suspended in the air, weightless and heavy at the same time. They did what? They refused to finalize anything. There was a pause. Then Celia added, "They think your family is too unpredictable, too much noise, too much instability." That was the phrase someone used. Instability. I leaned against the counter, letting the cool surface steady me. "So they are not married, not legally. And from what I hear, they will not be." He ended it quietly. Quietly. That word echoed through me, the way truth sometimes does when it takes the shape of something familiar. There were no fights, no dramatic court filings, no angry social media posts. Just a polite announcement within the Hale circle that plans had changed and both parties were moving forward separately. No details, no blame, no spectacle. Just silence. A silence that carried more weight than any public explosion ever could. Celia hesitated. "I am sorry," she said gently. "I know this is complicated." I swallowed slowly. "Thank you for telling me." After we hung up, I sat at my small kitchen table with my coffee cooling beside me. Outside, the sky was the pale gray of early winter, the kind of color that made everything appear softer. I watched a neighbor walk their dog, the leash loose in their hand, the dog's breath forming tiny clouds in the morning air. Paige had lost what she chased. Not because of me, not because I spoke up, but because the truth finally reached the people who needed to hear it. The Whitmore family had built their reputation on polished surfaces. One crack and the whole thing had begun to tremble. They had spent years rewriting me, but they never considered someone might examine their story under actual light. And now the consequences were settling around them in the same quiet way snow settles against a window. Later that day, Julian came over with a grocery bag filled with things I did not need. Fresh bread, soup from a place in Cambridge I liked, a bottle of wine neither of us opened. He set everything on the counter and looked at me carefully, as if assessing whether I was steady enough to talk. "Did you hear?" he asked. I nodded. "Celia called me this morning." Julian pulled out a chair and sat across from me. There was no smile on his face, no satisfaction. Just a kind of quiet understanding. It was always going to fall apart, he said. Not because of you, because it was built wrong. I exhaled slowly, my fingers resting on the rim of my mug. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant, vindicated, something sharp and bright. But what rose in me instead was softer, sadder, cleaner. They did this to themselves, I said. Yes, he replied. They did. Word spread in the weeks that followed, though none of it reached the public. The Hales valued discretion too much for that. They simply stepped back, shook hands politely, and moved on with their carefully curated lives. Paige did not move on as easily. I heard from someone in passing that she had taken time off work. She cried on the phone to an aunt who lived in Vermont, that she insisted to anyone who listened that nothing was her fault, that she never saw it coming, that she had been betrayed, that she had been made to look foolish. Her voice, I imagined, trembled with a mix of outrage and fear, the kind she used as a child when something did not go her way. Mom stopped posting family pictures. My dad stopped attending certain networking events. People noticed their absence more than they noticed their presence. Social capital, like any other currency, evaporated quickly when trust was gone. Not once did either of them reach out to apologize. Not once did they acknowledge the role they played. Blame was easier to direct outward. Mom blamed me openly to distant relatives, painting me as the source of catastrophe. My dad stayed quiet, which for him was louder than any speech he could have given. I would be lying if I said none of that hurt. Hurt still lived in small corners of me, tucked against bone and memory, but it was no longer the center of my life. It did not dictate my breath or my movement. It did not shape my days, because something else had taken its place, something sturdier. Life with Julian continued in its steady, deliberate rhythm. I finished my workdays without distraction. I cooked meals I actually enjoyed eating. I slept without waking from the old kind of nightmares where my parents' house swallowed me whole. And when December came again, something shifted. Margaret invited me to her home for Christmas Eve. She insisted, in the same warm tone she had used the year before, that I bring nothing except myself and maybe the small cranberry dessert she knew I loved to make. Arthur set up extra lights around the windows. Julie brought a tree from a small lot in Somerville, tugging it through the doorway like it was a prized catch. They decorated slowly, with music playing low, and every so often Margaret would hand me an ornament and say something soft like, "This one should go near the top." Or, "You have a good eye for balance, stay there." For the first time in years, Christmas did not feel like a wound. It felt like a room I was allowed to enter, a table I was invited to sit at, a place where my presence was not a burden, or a spectacle, or a tool in someone else's narrative. Christmas morning was simple and warm. Margaret insisted we open gifts in the living room while Arthur made waffles. Julian sat beside me, his knee brushing mine, handing me a small wrapped box with a grin so gentle it almost unraveled me. Inside was a silver bracelet, thin and understated, engraved on the inside with a single word: chosen. It took me a moment to speak. He nodded once. "You are." We spent the rest of the morning eating waffles and drinking coffee. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine. Nothing dramatic happened. Nothing cracked or screamed or demanded something from me. The quiet was full, not empty. Later, as I sat near the window wrapped in a blanket Margaret had knit years ago, I thought about Paige, about the wedding that never became a marriage, about the choices that had led her to a life where image mattered more than truth, about the family that had built so many illusions they eventually tripped over them. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel revenge blooming like fire in my chest. I felt clarity. I never needed revenge. The truth handled everything, and in that truth, I found something I had never had before, a life not shaped by fear. A family not chosen by blood, but by kindness. A future that did not require shrinking or apologizing or carrying blame that was. Never mine. As the day softened into evening, snow began to fall again, delicate flakes landing against the window. Julian sat beside me, his arm brushing mine. the warmth of him grounding me in a way I never expected to find. I looked around the room at the Lowell family, at the quiet joy that filled the house like soft light. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Before the night ended, I stepped outside onto the porch for a breath of cold air. The sky was a pale silver, the snow drifting in lazy spirals. I let the cold settle on my face, then smiled to myself. If you've ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you're listening from. Thanks for listening from Revenge Stories Lab.